Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Take the North podcast, along with Dan Wiederer of the Chicago Tribune. I am Mark Grote of the Score. Oh man, we've been trying to figure out my lighting because I've got weird light in downtown Chicago beaming out of my place, or maybe lack thereof. And there's Dan Wiederer with a sick-looking Take the North hoodie. That is beautiful. It is not cheesy. It is very wearable, is what I would say, Dan Wiederer.
And what I would say, Mark Grote, is http://breakingtea.com/products/take-the-north.
Oh my
That's
God.
where you get this. That's where the merch is at. We're repping it. Yeah. I'm excited about this. It feels like a big step in the evolution of a podcast to be able to rep your own merch on the air.
It's like, yo, we got merchandise. Show it one more time, man. I genuinely like that.
This is weird for our YouTube viewers for me to be standing up and doing all this
sick
stuff.
Fit. No, that's great. You look good. I like it all. You're a good hoodie model because you got the tall, slim thing going on. So
my wife got a T-shirt. My son got a T-shirt that he wore to school. So we're canvassing the suburbs here, Grote, with people trying to get them to latch onto this pod.
It's unbelievable. Well, we're at the end of a. I don't know. There's so many adjectives we use to describe Bears weeks, and I was going to say a wild week, but I don't even know if that's right. I think it was a very eventful, competent, dare I say, competent week by the Chicago Bears, just in every way, shape, and form. Hiring the head coach, the presentation that they put on, talking to lots of people who we will hear from today, just to give people a little bit of a preview of something that we're going to do and listen to this today. Dan and I at the introductory press conference of Ben Johnson the other day, after everybody got to talk to Ben Johnson and to the powers that be. The Bears were kind enough to bring a lot of the regular reporters into a room, and we got to sit down in a more informal, casual basis with Ben Johnson, on the record, to be clear, but it was a much more casual setting. So we're going to play some audio from that coming up here in just a little bit. I think to add to the eventful nature of the week and the competent nature of the week, because everybody sort of was anticipating the antithesis from the Bears, look no further, Dan, than what has been going on with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Jacksonville Jaguars and Liam Cohen, in terms of what we all worried about and obsessed about to some degree. Does this coach, Ben Johnson, have to line up with Ryan Poles and salaries and contract length and all of that? Liam Cohen blew off Tampa Bay because they fired the GM, and now he's going to Jacksonville. So it's yet just another little plot twist to this week, I suppose.
Yeah, so let's unpack that for a minute or two, because I do think it is relevant to some topics that we were talking about for weeks as the Bears prepared for their own coaching search. It was really fun to watch that thing unfold from afar and not have to cover it with what was happening with Liam Cohen and the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And essentially, Liam Cohen goes to Jacksonville to interview for their head coaching position. He says, okay, thanks, but no thanks. Goes back to Tampa, where he is offered an extension to become the highest paid assistant coach in the league, agrees to said extension, doesn't sign it, gets a call back from Jacksonville owner Shad Khan, who says, you know what? We decided to fire our general manager, Trent Baalke. Would you reconsider? And Liam Cohen said, hot damn, I would reconsider. And I'm going to reconsider, and I'm going to come back to Jacksonville, and we're going to discuss this thing. And he's in line, I think, as of right now, as we're recording here on Friday morning, to become the next head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And it just speaks to the topic that we really talked about since early December, about how important is general manager alignment going to be for candidates. That's a very vague pool, right? It was going to be case by case for a lot of people on what they were going to see, both in their preferences in their head coaching candidacy and in the organizations that they were exploring. When you look at this now in retrospect, you see at the very least that Ryan Poles was able to sell himself in a way that Trent Baalke wasn't, right? To this particular candidate that those two teams were going after. I asked you a question before we came on the air, is if Jacksonville decides to fire Trent Baalke as soon as the regular season ends, does that change their positioning in the sweepstakes for Ben Johnson? I think we both agree that, listening to Ben on Wednesday, his attraction to the Chicago job was very, very strong. But does it change at all if you've got another position open when the hiring cycle begins, where you have an opening to bring in your own GM? And then obviously I think money talks in a lot of these situations as well. And so there's a lot of layers to this, and to see it kind of play out in a worst case form, but then a best case form for the Jaguars with things that we talked about for weeks as being potential speed bumps for the Bears. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and it's really nice that it's not happening like that with the Bears. But there is one part to this. While you're right, Ryan Poles obviously did a great job of selling and did whatever he did as the point person. He did a great job. But I think that there's still a ton of pressure on Ryan Poles in the next 2 years in terms of the getting to know you process with Ben Johnson. Will they work well together? Will there be any kind of a power struggle? And I'm not even suggesting that there will be, but these are all questions that go through my mind. You know, Ben Johnson's the most powerful guy at Hallis Hall, and you could look no further than his salary. So it's a strange situation. Like I think it's almost like Ryan Poles is going to have to impress Ben Johnson more than the other way around because he's the golden child. Do you agree with that, Dan, or no?
Well, to some extent, right? Like you're going to have momentum and success, and this vision that you feel on day one has to be there on day 201, right? Like there's a lot of heavy lifting ahead and a lot of big decisions that need to be made. And it's great to sit down for 30 minutes in a Zoom conference room and be like, yeah, you know what? I think I can work with that guy. And it's a whole other thing to get into the dirty work that's going to be ahead for the Bears in replenishing this roster and setting up a runway for success for everybody. And so those two guys are going to have to stay wedded, and they're going to have to stay aligned, and they're going to have to stay in lockstep, which was a word that was used a couple times on Wednesday to get the Bears where they need to go. Clearly the Bears did a good job, and we didn't know going into this hiring process how Ben Johnson, and I will stress this, his people would assess the fit between Ben and Ryan Poles, because it really did sound on Wednesday like Ben Johnson leaned into his agent, Rick Smith, and people around him to help him sort through that. His plate was pretty full with the Detroit Lions still playing in the playoffs. And so some other people had to give him intel on Ryan Poles, on the Bears, and make him feel comfortable leaping into this job that he was attracted to. And so that was there. I also want to put this out here, Grote, and I want to put the proper frame around it, because this is not rock solid, nailed down 100% certainty. But between the reporting that Brad Biggs and I have done over the last month, here's kind of what we've uncovered. Ryan Poles was initially, through our understanding, brought to Chicago on a 4-year contract. At some point, a 5th year in the deal was activated. And it is the understanding of many people that were involved in this hiring process that Ryan Poles' current contract runs through 2026. So this isn't a what they'd call a lame duck year or the final year of his contract in 2025. It does go through 2026. I don't know what that means or what the significance is, but there's been a lot of chatter about where that sort of dynamic is. And I think that kind of gives us maybe a little bit more clarity on where things are. But to your point, you're saying that like Ryan has to prove himself to Ben Johnson, and that is absolutely accurate.
yeah, which is usually the other way around. I actually like it. I like that time frame. I think 2 years is good if that's what it is, and they're willing to roll with Ryan Poles and let him prove himself over the next 2 years and build something with Ben Johnson. I think it's perfect. I also think I was okay this time around, and not just because it was the Ben Johnson day and everybody was jubilant, but I was okay with the Bears being a bit ambiguous about Ryan Poles, because I think that's probably the right tone to have with Poles right now. Like, again, he's done a lot of really good things. We know that just last year was a bad year, and he needs to get back up on his feet and show that he can do this job in the long term and have a great relationship with Ben Johnson.
Well, so yeah, as we sort of start to transition into our listen to this audio, I think that the thing that probably bothered me the most coming out of the 2024 season is how big of a step backwards the Bears took in 2024, right? Like that's undeniable that they failed, right? Like Ben Johnson told you Wednesday that he was fearful of the Chicago Bears in the division more than any other team in the division, and they finished in last place by 6 games. So things went wrong. And what is daunting from the inside, I think, is that the Bears have so much work to do and so much heavy lifting ahead just to get back to the place where they were supposed to already be. Yeah, right. Like, and so now that's Ben Johnson's job with Ryan Poles to get them back to where they should have already been. And that's frustrating to wrap your brain around, because you're like, man, this should be something that's going up. And now you're just trying to clean up a mess and get the momentum going forward again. And so that will be pertinent to some of the things that we play here in a couple minutes. I did want to start. We're going to hear from the big four here today on this episode, Grote. We're going to start with Ben Johnson. We're going to transition over to team president Kevin Warren. We're going to go to Ryan Poles, and then we're going to finish with Caleb Williams. All very influential people in the organization, all with a lot at stake in this next year. But You mentioned the fireside chat, quote unquote, that we had with Ben Johnson later on Wednesday, and I thought there was some good human side stuff to come out of that. One of the things that really struck me in multiple forums on Wednesday was the confidence Ben has about why he can handle this head coaching position, and he said basically point blank, "I was the best in every role I ever had." Right? Like, and you're like, heck yeah, like love to hear that from the leader of your building. The reason he feels that way is because he's been through some stuff in his coaching career. Starts out as a grad assistant at Boston College, goes 7 years in Miami. He's in various roles in Miami, quality control, assistant offense, coaches 3 different positions there, and ultimately gets fired there when Adam Gase's staff gets blown out and doesn't have a job, right? Like, so you're working in Miami, you get fired there, and you're trying to figure out what's next in my coaching journey. And his entry point into Detroit, Grote, was to be a quality control coach on Matt Patricia's staff. And that's a tough thing for a guy who's been climbing the ranks, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, we're going to put you back into some of this grunt work and these lower level duties, right?
Depressing, yeah.
And so to hear Brad Biggs asked a question, you're going to hear the exchange here now. Just Ben Johnson reflect on some of the steps in his journey and why it has given him kind of the belief in his path now. It's pretty interesting. And so let's, without further ado, let's turn it over to Brad and Ben.
Morning, boys.
In a phenomenal climate with 2 kids, young kids, I would have been able to sink in as a father and a husband.
You see that's compatible with when you. That's my fault, Grote.
I'm
gonna restart.
I was actually just thinking, wow, because
there we go.
You guys got bounced out of Miami.
Yep.
How difficult was that? Because I don't think you went to Patricia's staff until the start of the year.
Yeah.
You had to take a demotion of QC. Like, was that kind of a crossroads for you?
Oh yeah, yeah. So we had just had our second child, and what really should have been the best time in my life, because I was still getting paid, to live in a phenomenal climate with 2 kids, young kids. I would have been able to sink in as a father and a husband in a profession that rarely happens. Truthfully, I was in my darkest moment, because something that I loved got ripped away from me. I invested all this time and effort over 7 years, 3 more up in Boston College, and when something like that gets ripped away from you, it makes you search deep in your soul. But fortunately, an opportunity arose, and the good Lord was looking out for me. And yeah, it's a little bit of humble pie having to take a step back to start over again and be a quality control coach. But you just trust, you put your head down and you work, and fortunately, good things happened.
I got goosebumps listening to that a second time there, Grote, because it's just that there's a passion in Ben's voice. There's a confidence in Ben's voice. And I love people who take the grinder's road, to get there, and to see him now at the top of the profession. He's going to have to stay there, right? Like, we hope we're still talking about Ben Johnson, head coach of the Bears, whenever that new stadium opens, wherever it opens. But there's a conviction in his belief in himself there that is truly evident, along with obviously a reflection of what he called his darkest moment.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the 2 words that I wrote down as well. I mean, that's heavy stuff. I appreciate him being transparent, allowing himself to be vulnerable in that moment. So you could kind of check that off the list. I mean, in relation to that, not the same thing, but just the transparency part. He said to us that in that little fireside chat that the last year when the Lions were eliminated from the playoffs and Ben Johnson was the hot coaching candidate, he said he didn't want to leave because he was, quote, not emotionally available. So, and that's loaded too. And I think that some of it is because of how it ended in Detroit and whatever was going on. But I do know one thing that I'm trying to dig into, Dan, is how long has this guy been eyeing this job? And it's okay.
Oh, sure.
You know what I mean? Like, I think he's been fond of this gig for a while, and it's a very sensitive topic because coaches aren't going to talk about that while somebody is in there. And with all due respect to Matt Eberflus, just from talking to people around the NFL, and how fast he ran to this job, I do wonder how long he's kind of in the old peripheral been like, Bears.
Well, there was some chatter this week, and probably most notably in some of the reporting that Albert Breer did for Sports Illustrated, that had this job come available a year ago, that Ben Johnson would have definitely considered it. Ben told
So
us
he was
on Wednesday.
emotionally available.
Well, Ben
or
told
what?
us the job wasn't available and he wasn't emotionally available. So like there's a little bit of
Right.
contention to that, but you never know, right? Like, so it's a hypothetical that we'll never have the answer for.
Exactly.
What would bother me though, Grote, is if that was indeed the case, if there was an understanding that Ben Johnson would take the job to be the coach of the 2024 Chicago Bears, if the job was available, and you decided to stick with Matt Eberflus and let him hire Shane Waldron and waste a year of everybody's
Oh,
life
my
that's
God.
affiliated with the Chicago Bears, like that's hard to get past, right? Like that is
Yeah.
really hard to get past. Ultimately, we can't press the rewind button. I know you and I like going in the hot tub time machine on this podcast and going back in time. We can't do
2018
that.
was my favorite podcast.
We can't do that in this
No.
case. And so we have to live in the reality that Ben Johnson is now the coach of the Chicago Bears, that, it is what it is.
Yes.
But man, like the other thing I was going to ask you, because I didn't bring this up on Wednesday, and I say this in the best way possible. There was parts of listening to Ben Johnson on Wednesday that reminded me of Ryan Pace. And like, I always had an enjoyable experience listening to Ryan Pace, because you always felt his passion. You always felt his belief. I thought he was able to articulate philosophies very well. The results over 7 years didn't get to where they needed to get to, but you had two guys that worked up from the bottom and clearly did so with passion as a fuel. And I don't know why that resonated with me on Wednesday, but I was curious at all if you can at least see the parallels that I felt on Wednesday afternoon.
Oh yeah, I mean, for sure. I had a little blackout there in the headphone. Could you review that question one more time, Dan? I'm sorry.
Just the comparable passion and
the pace,
articulation of philosophy
Yeah,
that seems to be married between the two.
Honestly, I don't know if I felt that because that's pretty specific right there, Dan. Like, and maybe I'm just so like I'm thinking of Ryan Pace, the guy that was not nearly as available as I thought he would be. You know what I mean? So it's hard for me to think back to the point where Ryan Pace was super articulate and was like really giving us anything. But if you remember that early on, then I'll give it to you. But I can't sit here and say that I felt that parallel yesterday.
Just an observation, and so I'm going to file that away and see how it kind of evolves over time with Ben and see where we go.
All right, no, my ears and eyes are alert here, so I'll be watching for that.
I will say this as we transition to the second clip, that like we picked 4 clips for today and we could have picked 104. Like there's been so much meat on the bone this week, and it's good for us because next week we can unpack a lot more. But I thought it would be good next to slide over to the perspective of Kevin Warren, the team president here, a guy who obviously gave Ryan Poles guidance, gave George McCaskey a push in this coaching search, and ultimately the Bears got who they got because they were aggressive and they pursued, and in George's word, they were ready to pounce when the time came to pounce. And so with Kevin, the conversation was, just about the organization and ownership's willingness to take this big swing, understanding that along with that big swing, there's usually a check that needs to be written that may be out of your comfort zone. And so here was a back and forth with Kevin Warren on that whole dynamic within the big swing.
Your top candidate doesn't come cheap. He's a top candidate this cycle. Certainly when he talks about experience, bringing in people who have done this before, there's going to be a significant cost with that. What assurances have you learned from the McCaskies about being willing to spend the resources it's going to take to build a winner with experienced coaches?
I think you saw it in this, all the way from George Hallis, when I passed that statute every morning. He was about innovation. He was about talent. He was about winning. He was about doing it the right way. And now to Virginia McCaskey, Ed McCaskey, and to George and the entire McCaskey family, this organization is built on history, tradition, and winning. And so one good thing about it, and I joke with George that probably if we did some study, we're probably related multiple generations ago. I'm fiscally conservative, but I am also aggressive. And I also believe in being creative, and I also believe that you get what you pay for. And so this is a situation where we needed to make sure we got the number one candidate. And it's not about the number one candidate. It was the number one candidate for the Chicago Bears. And all the other financial issues. Those are things we just have to be smart, with our money and make good decisions. And when things work out well, no one ever talks about the finances. And so it's up to us to make sure that we hire good assistant coaches. We got a world-class head coach. We have world-class players, and we need to make sure that we honor our way to say thank you to George Halas and what he has built here in the McCaskey family is to be successful. And I think it's a testament for our players to be here today. You see how Ben and his family operate, and this is just a great day for the Chicago Bears. I'm looking forward to move forward together.
You get what you pay for. Get what you pay for, Dan. I mean, I love that. Like all the fiscally conservative movement. Like he can be anything. Basically, is what Kevin Warren is telling everybody. I can be progressive and creative and fiscally conservative. But then then as he moved on, he says, "Well, you get what you pay for." That was like real talk right there. And so that's the part that I cling to. I'd like to think, because we want the Bears to do things differently, that Kevin Warren was the one that said, little nudge to George McCaskey, saying, because George McCaskey wisely, why would I want to pay this man $13 million a year or whatever he's getting?
This is where I think Kevin and Ryan are perfectly aligned in that both guys have no instinct in their DNA to settle, right? Like they both want the absolute best. What I think Kevin does is provide a little bit of authority and push to the people above him to say, let's not settle. And I said that from the day Kevin was hired, that's part of his DNA is the unwillingness to settle. And I think that's been one of the things that has absolutely hindered the Bears organization for the entire time that I've covered them, is the willingness to settle, to shrug past it and say, we don't have the wins, we don't have the quarterback, but everything else is there, right? Like there's different philosophies to going about success in a cutthroat billion-dollar industry like this. And Kevin has one that says, no, like when we're in a competitive forum, let's be the most competitive people in that forum. And in this case, I guarantee you part of the reason that Ben Johnson is the head coach of the Chicago Bears is because of the number that they put on the contract, right? And you get what you pay for, and I'm the top candidate, and this is what I want. And the Bears saying, okay, we'll get there. Kevin used the words aggressive and creative. I want to learn more about what creative means in this situation. Like, what does that mean? What is that? What are the assurances? What are the wrinkles that you're proud of that created creativity? Two other things I wanted to mention. George McCaskey did push back on the idea that he and Kevin are related. He joked at the start of his media availability that if Kevin took one of these Ancestry.com or 23andMe tests and got results back that said that he was related to the McCaskies, he should ask for his money back. That's what George said. But I thought that was a humorous little back and forth on Wednesday morning. The other part of this is that I like, if I was giving Kevin one small piece of advice, and he says, I know Kevin better than anybody.
That's right. You're Dan Wiederer, man.
So he should trust his word. The Halas statue, like, we're good. We've that box is checked. We don't need to come back to that every time. I'm sure that the George Halas statue said the same thing that restaurant patron at the Old Pueblo Cantina did. Hire Ben Johnson, right?
Yeah.
Like, the statue didn't hand out a shot of tequila like the patron at Old Pueblo Cantina, but we got it. Like we know that you're representing George Halas. We don't need to hammer that every single
It's
time.
like Kevin Warren has a base. You know what I mean? He's got a base of things that we know he's going to establish. You know what I mean? Like that is what he does.
Yet in there, like you hit it with your highlighter. You get what you pay for, right? And there's things in there, and you're like, hot damn, Kevin, you're damn right you do. Right?
I'll leave it right there. This is listen to this here on the Take the North podcast. Grote and Wiederer wearing a sick Take the North hoodie right now, and he's got all the there it is, man. You can go online and get yourself one. I'm going to. I have not. Mine has not arrived yet, but I hope it does soon. Dan is leading us through the audio here today. What do you got next? I think we got more
Ryan Poles.
Yes.
General Manager Ryan Poles. Now, this one's going to be a little bit meaty because it is, there's subtext here, Grote, and this is the most direct way that Ryan Poles had said something that has been kind of alluded to, insinuated, and hinted at for a couple months here. And this is Ryan Poles talking directly about what he believes the hiring of Ben Johnson will do for Caleb Williams.
Doing for Caleb, or giving Caleb, that he didn't have in his rookie season.
Yeah, he's going to be challenged to be a professional football player, to do the little things the right way. And that foundation, I know Ben's going to hit that early and often, get that foundation strong, because you're going to build everything off of there. So once that's there, now we can continue to get better and play more consistently.
Grote, as we try to cater to our more sensitive ears in this audience, I'm curious what Deion Miller would recommend as the emoji representation of holy bleep, because that quote from Ryan Poles was a holy bleep moment for me on Wednesday, where he says that Caleb is going to be challenged to be a professional football player. Caleb Williams has already finished one season in his professional football life, and now he's going to be challenged to be a professional football player, to do the little things the right way. What was your reaction when you heard that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. It was something that I played on the score just for the same reason, and I said, do not sleep on that portion, because I think sometimes people could hear that and just look at it as a generalization, like, because everybody's got to be more professional. But I said, and I'll say it to you, take what Ryan Poles said seriously, that it's all in place for a lot of things are in place for Caleb Williams, but he does have some learning to do still, some learning how to be straight up. He's got some learning how to be a professional quarterback, and nobody expected that he would have all of that down and complete command of a locker room in year one. But that does say that in terms of the way he comports himself on the field, in the locker room. And I don't think there's anything bad or devious or sinister going on. It just needs to be better. It just needs to be better.
There's an investment required, right?
Yes.
It is a mental, physical investment that is required. And Ryan Poles later in the day went on ESPN 1000 and expanded on that thought in a way. And I wrote down some bullet points from that. And he essentially said, look, like, Caleb played his entire college career under one coach, Lincoln Riley. And so when you come back to the NFL level, or when you get to the NFL level, there's different demands in this game. There are different demands of playing the position. There are different requirements to being great at it. And he said that the responsibilities of a quarterback in the pros is different. He said how you set up the foundation is different. I'm going to come back to that in a second. And he said that they're going to need to go back and reestablish that foundation so that Caleb can become a true pro and operate like he should. That scares me, because Ryan Poles' job in 2024 was to establish that foundation. It was clearly a failure. They fired the head coach. They fired the offensive coordinator. They did not get the work habits out of their rookie starting quarterback that they were desiring. And now they
training camp. I mean, like the stuff back to 1000 as well on the Bears pregame show, with the stuff that Ryan Poles hinted about what was going on in training camp, right?
No doubt. And there's a level of detail to this that the Bears missed. He also said, again, this is something that's been insinuated a couple times, that there were steps skipped in the quarterback development process, with understanding how a quarterback works protections, moves the offensive line, sets the run game, does his footwork, goes through his reads, and that you have to master those basics and fundamentals before you move on, and that they skipped steps in that process. That is 5-alarm fire stuff for me, because when you talk about what I said at the outset about this organization now needing to do so much work and so much heavy lifting to get back to where they should have already been, this is the forefront of that discussion. And it is amazing that they can acknowledge those errors without there having been greater consequence to those errors.
Well, and then the big question becomes, and I was talking about this a little bit on the score last night, how much of that, of Caleb's growth remaining static during the first year, was on the coaches or on the personality of Caleb Williams? And I guess we'll find out starting with the first OTAs as we study that. But do you have an opinion on that, Dan? Because I know it's a tough call.
Look, Ryan said that there's mutual ownership. Like, the coaches have to own that and Caleb has to own that. I think Ryan has to own that to some extent too, because he did not put a veteran quarterback in the room with Caleb Williams his rookie season. All shout out, all credit to Tyson Bagent for being who Tyson Bagent is. Good job, Austin Reed, earning a spot in the Bears locker room for 2024. But these are not guys that can show Caleb Williams the way. These are not guys who can say, listen, man, like, you can't go home for dinner yet. You can't go home and play Call of Duty with someone yet. Like, you got to get in here and understand exactly what the game plan is for this week. And that's where a veteran presence in that room is valuable. I'd be really interested to see what Ben Johnson's philosophy is in terms of setting up the quarterback room now.
Yeah,
right?
no, that's a great
what
point.
does that look like going forward?
Yeah, maybe we should be looking at that, as opposed to, or in conjunction with, the coordinators as well. I'll say one more thing about this before we get to our final cut here on the Take the North podcast and to listen to this segment. One thing, look, all college players, do this, and I understand. They love their college coach. They will always talk about their college coach, especially in the first 2 years of their league. I think that's something that, in general, Caleb Williams has to kind of get over is USC, period. And
Yeah, right.
he still references Lincoln Riley. Like, he didn't mention any coaches on the staff last year, understandably. But it might be time to stop talking about Lincoln Riley and USC.
No, I'm with you on that. And Caleb experienced great success under Lincoln Riley. He's got a Heisman Trophy somewhere in his one of his residences.
I get it, and there's a bond built. Players build bonds with their college coaches.
My last word on this is just what you said at the outset, that like this can be really easily blown up into something more than it actually is. And there's nothing here that like if you say that Caleb Williams has some professional maturing to do, that's fair without being like, this guy's a total bum. What a flake. What a loser, right? Like, this is just a 23-year-old kid learning how to make the next step in his journey as a professional, as an athlete, as all those things. And now the Bears are going to have to find people that push him and, direct him properly. And it sounds like that's what Ryan Poles is most looking forward to Ben Johnson doing. Now you've got to turn talk into action, right?
Yeah. And it was, and maybe it's Shane Waldron alone who he decided philosophically Ryan Poles is going to change because he was way too soft with Caleb, maybe too afraid of Caleb and whatever that might entail. So that
storyline's not going away. Right?
No,
we're not going away.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned too, that this, like I said, this is not something that has to be stirred up into something huge right now, but it's just something that Dan and I caught in our ears, and it's something to watch and to see if it continues to mature. And that's the biggest job that Ben Johnson has right now. What is our Dan Wiederer? What's our finale cut here today?
It is Caleb Williams, and it is on the topic that we just talked about to some extent. Ryan Poles referenced at the end of the season that one of the biggest issues for Caleb in the disruption and stress that he encountered in his rookie season was compatibility issues, right? Like, he literally said the word compatibility. And so I wanted to ask Caleb directly that, in addition to the competitive fire that he sees in Ben Johnson, where does he feel compatibility right out of the gates with his new head coach? Thought that would be a good place to start. And Caleb gave a very long-winded answer on it, but let's listen to this. What do you see that's compatible with you? That now is so much?
That's one of the most important things, is that fire, that will and want to win. I think not only me, but being able to bring the accountability, being able to bring the discipline, like he said up there on the podium. If guys are stepping out of line or, not being in line, and not just with him and things like that, but with the team, and you're not doing the right things, you gotta be, you got to be put out on blast in front of the whole team, because that shows the accountability. That shows the discipline that he talked about up there, and being consistent with that throughout his long career here and our career here is going to be important. It starts with him. No, you're all good. It starts with him, and it's a lot of people here. I get it.
I'm really sorry though.
It starts with Ben and the rest of the coaches that he brings along, and then once we figure out exactly what his rules are and how everything goes and how it needs to be run, it bleeds into the players, and then from there it's in the locker room, and now we have to take it and run with it from there, and keep leaning on each other, keep growing and progressing, and being disciplined to each other, and accountable to each other, because what he's been able to do over there with Detroit, and that offense, you don't see an offense doing things that they were doing without somebody like Ben at the helm of it, just because there's so much time and so much effort and so much energy and passion that goes into it. That's great and all, but without the discipline and accountability, you don't get to do all those cool things like the stumble bumble that he talked about with us, which he also brought up to me as soon as we talked, and I didn't truly appreciate it. And then things like somebody like Tom Brady being like, I've never seen that in my life, and he's been through so many games, so many opportunities and things like that he's had on the field and watching, when they pitched it to the running back, and then they pitched it back to Amara for like a 20-yard, almost scored. I don't know how long the distance was, but you don't have cool creative things like that without somebody like him obviously being such a creative mind, and then being super disciplined, being super, and holding all the guys accountable throughout the weeks and training camp and all these different things.
He's so fatherly. Like, you're listening to Caleb talk about Ben Johnson, not Caleb, but Ben Johnson like, you're not going to get your dessert until you get the basic parts down. We're not going to do any fancy plays.
Yeah.
You're not getting the basics. So I don't know if like Caleb is just regurgitating right there, or if it's really in his head. Okay, Dad says I got to do this, so we got to really get this part down. I can't tell with Caleb sometimes.
Well, my first reaction, first and foremost, is how dare you, Mark Grote, interrupt Caleb Williams in that moment. But also kudos to you for getting the mic in front of your mouth to apologize with a wholehearted apology.
I
That
did.
was a good moment.
There's nothing worse, this, Dan, because I'm sure you've been guilty of it. There's nothing worse than prematurely asking a question when another reporter is listening to their answer. You cut off the subject, and you're essentially cutting off the other reporter. I did it. I hated myself for it, but I got over it, and I'm glad that Caleb Williams guided me through it.
And he kept going. He kept going there for like another 2.5 minutes. So you didn't knock him too far off course. He was able to keep going. The one thing he said in there that I'm put a star around and like, all right, let's keep an eye on this over the next 6 to 8 months is if guys are stepping out of line or not being in line and you're not doing the right things, you've got to be put out on blast in front of the whole team because that shows the accountability. This accountability buzzword it's just been lurking for 4 or 5 months now. And now Caleb is basically saying, look, like everyone in this locker room needs to understand that if you're messing up, you're going to be put on blast. Like that is what the standard needs to be here. Again, I go back to this because Matt Eberflus promised 3 years ago to grade every snap of every practice in a way that was going to be firm and hard and demanding. And he didn't follow through on any of it when it came time to administer consequence. And so Ben Johnson's got a challenge on his hand to establish his authority in that way right away and not waver from it. It's easy to do it in, OTAs. It's easy to do it in minicamp. Like you've got to carry this through an entire first year so that in year 2, nobody thinks that there's any other way to do things than the way that you've established. And it sounds like Caleb's on board with that. And as one of the captains is going to have to be one of the guys that enforces that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, I think it was Cole Kmet during the season, at least on one occasion, maybe a couple indicated that the practice habits were bad, that things going on in practice were not good, and not his exact words, but something to that effect. I know DJ Moore had said something about that, and well, he shared with us that I guess there was a day in practice where guys were being held extra accountable, probably trying to make up ground for them being the opposite. So there were examples, and that was what was going through my head. And just as the biggest example of the year, how the whole Tyreek Stevenson thing
no doubt
handled, because that was the microcosm of discipline and should he be disciplined? And did Matt Eberflus drop the ball by not disciplining him right away and almost being caught off guard by the whole thing, it felt like.
When I had a conversation about this with someone this week in regards to, like Mark Andrews didn't speak after dropping the game-tying touchdown pass in the playoffs. Just the same way that Tyreek Stevenson didn't speak after allowing the Hail Mary to happen in Washington. And 10 other guys that were on the field for that play immediately stepped up, faced the music, and talked it through, right? Like that's the type of stuff that shows accountability immediately from the player themselves. And when they don't do that, there needs to be something that goes along with that. I'm not as bothered with that as the fact that Tyreek Stevenson went on to not really understand exactly what he had done wrong. In addition to prematurely celebrating that play in Washington, he did, weeks later in a story he did with Mark Potash, was still unaware that him batting the ball was the wrong responsibility on that play. How do we get that far down the road from that play without it being crystal clear what went wrong for everyone? And that's something that as a coach, you've got to get your arms around immediately. And again, like I asked Ben Johnson in the press conference, like how does he define accountability? And the one word that hit me was consequence. He said he used the word consequence. It was a word that Jalen Johnson used, I think in week 18, where he said, look, like, because I think you and I both asked him in the locker room, like, what does that look like? What is consequence? And he said, bottom line, playing time, right? Like that's how you get guys' attention. You take away their playing time. And then they're like, oh, okay, they mean business here.
I mean, they're saying real stuff, man. Taking away playing time, putting a guy on blast. I mean, those are not cliche things. You know what I mean? Like putting a guy on blast in front of it, like to have Caleb saying that. I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
so
and if Caleb's got to be the guy put on blast sometimes, he's going to accept it. And if Cole's got to be the guy put on blast sometimes, he's going to accept it. And that's what a winning C word is.
you want to say it
C
so bad.
C concept. Karma chameleon is what I'll
You know what I think,
say,
Dan?
right? Like,
Dan, here's what I think, Karma chameleon. Here's what I think. I think that when Ben Johnson establishes this culture and we're like,
Oh, no!
No, hold on, Dan, hold on. You're going to be able to use the word again. You will have recovered. You are in recovery right now. And I think that by the middle of the season, I'm predicting that word will come back into your vocabulary.
Nope. It is a hard and fast rule that they need to have a 9th victory before I use that word in my vocabulary.
All right.
They have to prove that they are a winning football team. They have to be a 9-win football team or better before I believe in the C concept.
How many years have you been covering the Bears?
12 seasons.
12 seasons now. How many 9 or above seasons wins? So we can understand, folks. Dan has been hurt before, so I think we should understand.
2018. It's the only year that they had good culture.
Oh, and remember that podcast? Remember that one time we talked about 2018 and all the cool things that went on until it wasn't cool?
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt about it.
That was awesome. Dan, anything else here audio-wise? Great job on Listen to This today. We kind of left it to Weedsy today.
No more audio, but I'm going to go back here for 1 second and just shout out this URL again. This beautiful navy blue.
It really is a nice, like, people can say I'm just saying that, but I'm not. Like, that's a nice. I was afraid it might be like cheesy or unwearable, but it's not. It's sick.
So it's breakingt.com. T is just the letter T, not TEE. breakingt.com /products/take-the-north. Get there.
Hoodies. What else do we have? What else do we have? Is it just hoodies right now, or do we have like
hoodies,
hats,
t-shirts? I don't think there's
do
hats. Let me look while I'm on with you. You keep talking for like 30 seconds.
Yeah, maybe we've got cozies or cuzzies or whatever they call those that you put. Koozies that you put around your drink to keep it cold. I'm just thinking of
t-shirts and hoodies right now is what
t-shirts. Oh, that's awesome. No, that's a great start. I don't know that we need anything else. Maybe some sunglasses down the road. I'm just thinking of stuff I have from the score through the years.
And those folks that took our survey that we've been hyping up for the last 3 to 4 weeks here, they got a 50% discount code to buy that stuff. Hopefully they use that and then got some stuff for their friends as well.
Okay, we've made everybody happy here, Dan.
Yeah,
I think
I'm happy today. I got to the end of a week, Grote, and I feel happy.
Yes. Well, I am. Other than doing the podcast with you, still, Dan, I will continue to do that. I got the old shutter down alert from my bosses in terms of, obviously I'll be following the coordinators and reporting here on Take the North, but they said, you know what, relax, go ahead. This is done. You've done your usual average work, so we're going to give you a few days off.
It's been a lot better than average. I'm looking forward to the shutter down authorization for my place of employment. Hopefully it comes sooner rather than later. But
yep. Well, we don't want that, Dan, because we love reading you in the Chicago Tribune. That is Weedsy, Dan Wiederer of the Chicago Tribune, and a frequent insider on 670 The Score as well for Adam Studzinski, who is the executive producer of Take the North and the executive producer of the Bernstein and Harris Show on The Score. I am Mark Grote. Thank you so much for watching and listening to the Take the North podcast.
Great talk. See you out there.